So what does the world's most powerful central banker make of the worsening chaos unleashed by the war on Iran?
We don't know what the effects of this will be, and really no one does. We'll have to wait and see. I don't know how it's going to affect our thinking. I really don't.
With leadership of the world's biggest economy flying blind, more bad news upended financial markets today. An Israeli attack on a major Iranian oil field triggered a counterstrike on Qatar's LNG hub, responsible for 20% of the world's shipborne gas.
Almost every day that this conflict is inching on is becoming increasingly escalatory. It's increasingly targeting energy export infrastructure, and it is taking further steps towards the doomsday scenario for a global energy crisis.
Those that were open were under heavy pressure.
Energy analyst Saul Kavonik reprising memories of the OPEC oil shocks of half a century ago that resulted in fuel rationing.
What we see now risk being 3 times the magnitude of the shocks we saw in the 1970s, exacerbated further by the fact that not only is oil being disrupted, but we're also seeing a major disruption to gas. And on top of that, close to a third of the world's seaborne fertilizer is now not making it to market through the Strait of Hormuz. And this shortage of fertilizer could start to cause a food crisis in the second half of this year.
We're going into planting season now, and particularly once the crops are in, they're going to need nitrogen-based fertiliser to grow, and if you don't have that, then you're going to get less crop.
Right now, the darkening outlook is all about petrol bowsers around the country, prompting National Cabinet to appoint a federal fuel supply coordinator, which the Prime Minister said was about being over-prepared.
I understand there are Australians in some parts of our nation that are really worried as they watch what is unfolding in the Middle East, and that is understandable. But we're doing all that we can to secure our fuel supply and to get it to the places that need it.
The Prime Minister's now familiar message of reassurance tinged with the prospect of more draconian or disruptive action to come.
My government will be announcing more measures to prepare the nation for supply chain challenges over coming days and weeks.
As the pressure mounts on the government to get ready for what may yet turn into a COVID-level crisis, the Prime Minister, for the first time, urging the US President to call time on his war.
The objectives of denying Iran the opportunity to have a development of a nuclear weapon have been secured.
Ever since the crisis began with Israeli and US attacks on Iran, which almost immediately escalated into a regional conflict, the Australian government's core assumption was that it would be limited in duration. As recently as a week ago, the privately held view was that the hot war would last another fortnight tops. But with every day, that hope looks more threadbare, putting pressure on the government to prepare for the worst.
What we should also expect and hope that they're doing is behind the scenes pulling every lever they have to make sure that the fuel that normally would come to Australia remains a priority.
Saul Kavonik says Australia is very vulnerable when it comes to the 80% of liquid fuels it imports from countries such as Singapore, South Korea, Malaysia and China.
Where there's an opportunity for Australia here is because of our strong LNG exports. Now is the time for the Australian government to be reminding our trade partners that we've been a very reliable source of LNG supply for their economic security, and we expect to also for them to be a very reliable supply of our fuel for our energy and economic security, and that reliable source of supply is a two-way street.
This crisis is reawakening familiar arguments over resilience and preparedness. Respective governments have allowed Australia's refining capacity to decline because of cost. Likewise with fertilisers, which come largely from abroad. And then there's the question of whether to hike taxes on gas exporters to subsidise support for households and businesses against the inevitable price shocks to come. To that end, former ACCC boss Rod Sims this week called for a Norway-style fair share levy on gas companies. Others say the government should proceed cautiously.
So that is something that's being considered. There are negative consequences involved with doing that too, when you suddenly change the goalposts on tax and what that means for the investment in Australia's ability to continue to maintain our exports. So the government needs to balance those things up against each other.
There's little doubt the government is already grappling with these options, but its first job will be to reassure Australians worried about a potential energy crisis, the likes of which few under the age of 60 have ever experienced.
It's premature to panic. There's some shortages in localised situations around Australia, but by and large, fuels are available for the everyday citizen.
Today, the federal government released 500 million litres of fuel that's being directed to regional Australia. The Resources Minister is Madeleine King. Madeleine King, welcome to the programme.
Good evening, Sarah.
How quickly will the new fuel task force ensure that diesel and petrol reaches the people who most need it?
The new task force will set about its work immediately, as one would expect. It is really important to make sure the fuel that Minister Bowen has ensured is released into the system gets to where it needs to go to, and there is a priority that fuel does go to regional areas in the places where it is needed, where we have seen some of those instances of a bit of a too much demand leading to difficulties getting fuel. But what I would want to reassure all your viewers tonight is that Australia is well supplied with fuel. The government is working every single day to make sure that we use the stock holding obligation and the stored fuel that we have wisely and prudently to make sure it gets where it needs to go to. And Australians should fill up their car as they normally do, not stockpile, but just keep going as they have done, and we will be working every single day to make sure that will remain the case.
Let me give you a practical example, if I may. There are 80 service stations in New South Wales, we understand, that have run out of diesel. What will the task force actually do to make sure those stations get fuel?
Well, the task force will work with the states and territories, including New South Wales, of course, to make sure that the fuel gets to where it needs to go
that's the principle. What are the steps? What are the actual practical measures that are going to be taken to move that fuel quickly?
Well, I would imagine it will be getting it on trucks and getting it to those petrol stations as soon as is possible. They have to come out of the storage tanks, as you can imagine. There has to be arrangements, and we are doing work that would ordinarily take weeks is being done in days to make sure it does get to those petrol stations.
Have you actually secured guarantees from countries, Japan, Korea, others in the region, that they will continue to supply Australia?
Over the weekend, I was in Tokyo and I met with a number of my ministerial counterparts, and we discussed the conflict as a whole, but also the disruption it is causing to supply chains. I reminded them, as everyone would expect, that Australia has remained and will remain a reliable supplier of energy security to the region, and that the import of their liquid fuel to Australia is as equally important. I can reassure Australians tonight that our trading partners are very, very well aware of how we all have to work together through what is a difficult time for the region, given that before the fuel is even refined, it has to come in its crude oil form out of parts of the Middle East to even get to those refineries. So we all have a part to play, and Australia will continue to play its part in ensuring our neighbours in Japan, in Singapore, in the Republic of Korea and Malaysia and others get the energy security they need from us.
I mean, you make the point there. We are at the end of the global fuel supply chain. So what do you do if those countries reach a point where they don't have enough fuel for their own populations? What measures do you have? What levers can you pull, apart from persuasion, to get them to make sure those cargoes are loaded and head to Australia?
Well, right now, at the moment, we are in where we are still very well supplied with fuel, and all the ships we expect to arrive with fuel are indeed on their way or arriving. Working together in a cooperative manner is the best path forward. Working together is what secures Australia the refined fuel we need, and equally secures our neighbours the energy security they need. So this is what we'll work on right now and into the future, because this government, and indeed I personally believe that is the most productive way of ensuring we have a secure fuel supply. But I would also add, we do have 2 remaining refineries, and Minister Bowen and the government has made sure that less of that fuel gets exported, but instead goes into the domestic supply, so that there's more fuel available every single day to Australian consumers.
And one of the crucial issues right now is fertilizer for the farming community. What are you able to do to ensure that sufficient supplies of fertilizer reach farmers, particularly in remote and, in the remote parts of Australia?
Yes. Well, Minister Collins, the Minister for Agriculture, has held a roundtable with the National Farmers Federation, and we understand the concerns. My understanding is that Australia is well stocked with enough fertilizer. We do need to make sure it gets to the places it needs to, and Minister Collins will be working every moment of her days to make sure that happens, and is in touch with her state counterparts to make sure that happens. Further into the future, we are working as a government to ensure our future fertiliser supplies. Indeed, this government has invested $500 million, over $500 million, into the Perdaman Urea project in Karratha, Western Australia, which will produce urea, which is the nitrogen in your NPK fertiliser. That production starts next March. And that will be a crucial part of us having fertiliser independence, if you like, and is a crucial part of this government's Future Made in Australia agenda.
Madeleine King, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, it's a pleasure. Thanks, Sarah.